just watch football. You guys watch other sports as well, but I do as well. And to be fair, I mean, I watch a bit of basketball, but not too much. And I thought it would be an interesting idea. Why don't I sort of make a video for those of you who either want to get into the NBA, maybe if you have seen it and you like it and you wanna get into it, and you're current like Premier League fan, football fan, then maybe this is gonna help you get into it and let you know which team you should support. Or the other way around, if you maybe don't watch football or the Premier League, but you watch basketball, you watch the NBA, then hopefully this video will help you in deciding which team you should follow. So I've picked out every single Premier League team, all 20, and I've given them an NBA team, which I think is most similar to them. So if you're a fan of them, you should support them for various reasons, which I will explain. Now obviously there are only 20 Premier League teams. I think there's a lot more NBA teams, so not every NBA team is in this video. I've only picked out a select few for this, and I should do a big disclaimer here that as I said, I watch NBA a bit. I have an okay knowledge, but fairly limited knowledge on it. So I've done quite a bit of research and stuff, so some of the comparisons may not be like 100% accurate, and if you guys do watch the NBA, or you can think of a better comparison than the ones I have come up with, then please let me know in the comments below. But just a bit of fun today, and yeah, we're going to begin. We're going to do some gum chewing as well, so let's pop one of those in now. Okay, so we're going to go in alphabetical order for the Premier League teams. So if you're a Bournemouth fan, support the Charlotte Hornets. The Hornets don't have much of a history. They were an expansion franchise that debuted in the late 80s. They moved away for a few years in the early 2000s, and then came back as another expansion franchise called the Charlotte Bobcats. And then the Bobcats changed their name to the Hornets when the Hornets moved a bunch of places. Anyway, it's been a long history with really no identity of winning. In the 90s though, they had really fun players in Alonzo Mourning, Larry Johnson and Glenn Rice. Oh yeah, and Michael Jordan was also their owner at one point, which was pretty cool. Now, when it comes to cool owners, Bournemouth are, literally owned by Michael Jordan as well right now. So that's kind of all I need to say. And yes, I know it's a different one, but still, that's pretty hilarious. Anyways, I didn't compare them just for that though, because the thing about Bournemouth, obviously, they spent a lot of time floating around the lower divisions, and they've got the smallest stadium in the league, besides Luton, who are going down. It's a very relaxed, passive fan base, as it's a club with not too much history, but have had some really fun times and exciting players, especially under Eddie Howe, which is similar to the Hornets in many ways. But of course the Michael Jordan ownership thing was too good of an opportunity for me to turn down, so this is a perfect comparison. I should also caveat this with, by the way, I'm not comparing them in their current state, I'm doing it as a franchise as a whole. But anyway, say either LeBron James or Michael Jordan. Of course, Michael Jordan made his name at the Chicago Bulls and was influential in their rise to fame, and he was the main man in the greatest era of a franchise's history. Now, if I ask you the same question for the Premier League, who's the greatest Premier League player ever? Most of you would probably say Thierry Henry, who also happens to be one of the most influential players for his club and the main man in the greatest era of the club's history. Another comparison is that the Bulls were very bad before and after the greatest player to ever play left, which, just like Henry, since he's left Arsenal, they haven't won a league title. So Arsenal haven't really fallen off as badly as not just Henry, but still. The strong parallel, though, is that they and the Bulls both have achieved the closest thing to sporting perfection in recent memory, though, with Arsenal going invincible, while the Bulls achieved 72 wins in an NBA season, which was one of the best ever records. But both of these achievements were a long time ago, and both haven't really been able to rebuild since their great coaches Phil Jackson and Arsene Wenger left the club. Okay, next up, if you're an Aston Villa fan, support the Philadelphia 76ers. Now, Philly have a pretty great history. They won a title in the 80s with a pretty famous team. They had Allen Iverson, who is one of the coolest NBA players of all time, and they made the finals. But there's also a lot of awful play in their history, and they were pretty bad up until the last few years. They're infamously known for the process, for the franchise that choose to be really, really bad and lose a lot in the hopes of becoming good one day. Philadelphia is this northeastern enclave of a rabid fandom that borders on overly aggressive, and there is really no other fan base like a Philadelphia fan base. There probably is no meaner fan base than a Philly fan base too. So it's this mix of just really crazy fans with great tradition and some good, cool players, but not a great amount of winning. So what comes to mind for me is probably Aston Villa. Villa obviously had plenty of success in the past. They've also had some just calamitous seasons in recent years. They've been great, they've been terrible, they've had some wonderful players like Grealish, and also some awful ones. They're not known as being some of the most rabid fans in the league, but they're not known as bad fans either. I guess you can also say that they have done their own process, getting relegated to the Championship, and then now competing for a Champions League place, with both teams also much better now, and also with a genuine chance of competing for something. Compared to back in the day, I think it's a solid comparison. Next up, if you are a Brentford fan, support the Denver Nuggets. Okay, now this is a bit of a dodgy comparison, but hear me out on this one. Denver is a team that has just kind of been around for most of its history, especially recent history. They've had regular season success with some very fun, exciting players, but historically just can't make real noise in the postseason, if we exclude last year where they did win the championship. Lastly, the Nuggets aren't the most popular team in the city, even though they're really, really good. So, if we just pretend the title last year never existed and they did not win it, then I think Brentford is a good comparison. Brentford right now are, historically maybe not a team that have always been around, but nowadays they are a team who are very solid. They've beaten a lot of the big teams, had a season where they were competing for Europe, have some really fun players and star players like Ivan Toney, who, I guess you can kind of say is their Nikola Jokic, although that is a really bad comparison, but still, you get the point. There are also the obvious comparison of they are not the most popular team in their city and are just a very solid team who, like the Nuggets, haven't really won much but have been pretty decent in recent years. Again, if we exclude last year, so this one was a bit weird, but I think it makes sense still. Of course, it's a bit hard because the NBA and the Premier League is very, very different, so some of them can be a bit ropey, but hopefully you get the idea. If you are a Brighton fan, support the Miami Heat. Now this one is a bit more vague than the others, but the problem is that you got too many teams that have won championships in the NBA, and there's only really like 4 or 5 teams that have won anything of note in England. So while Miami have won championships and Brighton haven't, let's ignore that for a second and look at the other parallels. Miami is a bit of a soft market, a kind of glitzy team where the fans are only really there if they're really good. And I could kind of see the Brighton comparison. Brighton fans will obviously contend that they were there in their worst years and back the team, and of course they did. But now they have a great owner, and Tony Bloom, who has given them a new stadium, and this is the brightest period in Brighton's history, with much more fans and the club being so much bigger. They've never been in the Premier League before, and now they have recently finished 5th and haven't been relegated since coming up. They're one of the most analytics-heavy clubs in the Premier League, which is a bit different to Miami, who seem to be more of a team that spends money on the big guys and big names. But still, Miami is near the beach and so is Brighton, so let's roll with it. If you're a Burnley fan, support the Orlando Magic. The Orlando Magic are a franchise with a mix of highs and lows. In the 90s they had a memorable run with Shaquille O'Neal reaching the NBA Finals. They also had a successful period with Dwight Howard, making it to the finals in 2009. However, outside of those peaks, they've struggled with inconsistency and rebuilding phases and are yet to win a championship. Notably, they had a tough stretch where they were known for intentionally losing games to rebuild through the draft, so they've really witnessed both excitement and really bad frustration over the years. This is fairly similar to Burnley, as both franchises operate in leagues where they're often overshadowed by larger, more successful teams. Burnley in the Prem and Magic in the NBA are known for occasionally punching above their weight class and causing upsets against bigger clubs, as Burnley did under Sean Dyche, but most of the time are very small fish in a large pond. Like the Magic, Burnley have had moments of success, including winning the top flight league title in 1921 and the FA Cup in 1914. However, both franchises have also experienced their fair share of challenges. Burnley have faced relegations in recent years, while the Magic have struggled with inconsistency and rebuilding. Both are characterised by their underdog underdog status, occasional moments of success, and ongoing challenges. I think it's a decent comparison. And of course, Burnley is just as great a city as Orlando is, perhaps even better. Any Americans watching, I definitely recommend going to Burnley on holiday at one point. Like, it's probably better than Orlando. If you are a Chelsea fan, support the Dallas Mavericks. Another team that really hadn't had much success for a while is the Mavericks. Until about 2000, when a very controversial and very loud owner, Mark Cuban, took over the franchise, there really wasn't much winning. The team was quite lackluster and nobody really viewed them as contenders. But then they hit big with international kid out of Germany named Dirk Nowitzki, and then they really had about 15 years or so of retained success. They made a finals in 2006 and won the title in 2011. Dirk became beloved in Dallas and across the NBA, and Cuban now seems like part of the face of the franchise, really, just because he's so out there and for the way he transformed the side into a winning franchise. That probably sounds very familiar for Chelsea fans who, to be fair, we did have history and were a pretty decent side before 2003. But when a new eccentric owner came in, things changed and suddenly they started winning just like the Mavericks did. Of course, Chelsea dominated a bit more than the Mavericks, but it's probably the best comparison I can get when it comes to a new owner coming in and changing a club and franchise. If you're a Crystal Palace fan, support the Indiana Pacers. Indiana, historically in America, is known as a basketball state, more so at the high school and college level, but it's a basketball state through and through. The Indiana Pacers are a team that doesn't have much success in terms of the NBA though. However, they are fairly consistent. The 90s they were good, the 2000s they were the Pistons' biggest rivals. This last decade or so, they've always been in the mix but never got over the hump. They're a small market team, kind of a boring team but just consistent. They're never really at the bottom of the table, nor at the top, which is exactly what Crystal Palace are. Since establishing themselves back in the Prem, they haven't been relegated back down, always finishing mid-table, flirting with relegation at points but never in any real danger. They are a consistent team who always have some great players who are kind of too good for the side, such as Zaha, which is similar to the Pacers who had players like Paul George when they weren't doing great. I think this is a pretty good comparison. If you're an Everton fan, support the Los Angeles Clippers. Everton are overshadowed in their city by a much bigger and successful club in Liverpool. The Clippers are massively overshadowed by the Lakers in their city, who are also one of the biggest franchises in the league. The parallels are great. There's also the element of both being underachievers to an extent. The Clippers have been on the brink of something great, with big players such as Kawhi Leonard, James Harden and Paul George, but things haven't really clicked for some reason, and despite the stars at their club, they haven't been able to deliver a championship. Similarly, Everton, maybe not now, but more so a few years ago, had the stars in Carlo Ancelotti, James Rodriguez, spent tons of amounts of money on players in a bid to achieve something, but never delivered. All of this while they obviously tend to live in the shadow of the other team in Kings have been around since the late 40s, but they started out in New York and made it all the way to California. They won a title in the early 1950s, but since then have had really no history. They had some fun teams in the early 2000s that were the hipster team. Most people liked the Kings because of the cool passes, the fast-paced plays, but they never won anything. They always ran into the Lakers, and they've been pretty poor since the early 2000s. They're also in the capital of California, but not really one of its best shining cities. Fulham, I think, is similar in terms of they were fairly well liked, or at least nobody truly hates Fulham, I think. When they went on their UEFA Cup run about a decade ago, when they beat Juventus and made it to the final, every neutral was really willing Fulham on. I don't think they're really offensive in it anyway to most football fans, but just like the Kings, it doesn't necessarily mean that that translates into success, as Fulham haven't won anything in a long time. But back in the day, we did have some famous players in the 50s and 60s. So with both teams fairly well liked, have decent history but not too much recent success, I think that's decent. If you're a Liverpool fan, support the Boston Celtics. The Boston Celtics are the most storied franchise in the NBA. They've won 17 finals, albeit only one since 1987, and have only failed to make the playoffs once in the last 12 years. They have such a rich history of winning, just like Liverpool, but also, just like Liverpool, in the modern era, haven't been able to replicate that success. The last time the Celtics were NBA champions was in 2008, a 16-year drought they are currently on, which is similar to Liverpool's previous 30-year Premier League droughts. And just like Liverpool, during this time, they have been pretty poor, but also the nearly men, getting to the finals in 2010 and recently in 2022, but failing at the last hurdle. Both teams are also very good right now and have good chance of winning titles in the near future, but just lack that something to get over the line. But that being said, are still the most decorated teams in their leagues. If you are a Luton fan, support the Minnesota Timberwolves. Now, Luton was a very hard one, but I'm going to give this one a go. So the Timberwolves had one of the greatest power forward big men in NBA history, and ever since they came into the league in the late 80s, that about sums up all that's been notable about the Timberwolves. They've been pretty bad for most of the last 30 plus years. They're in probably maybe the worst or the coldest climate in the NBA, up in Minnesota, which makes it difficult for teams to play there and isn't a very attractive place to go based on that climate. They also have a long-time owner who just wants the best for the team, but that doesn't necessarily keep them from falling. Luton, therefore, makes sense for a couple of reasons. Firstly, Luton is not a very nice place to go for away teams, similar to Minnesota, but maybe not for weather reasons. They, like the Timberwolves, had some success back in the day, but nothing too major, and since then haven't done anything in terms of trophies. They also have a very loyal owner who cares about the club, so there are some similarities there, but it's not the greatest one in this list, as it's very hard to find someone like Luton to compare. If you're a Manchester City fan, support the Golden State Warriors. Between 2016 to 2018, State between 2015 to 2019, made it to the NBA Finals for 5 consecutive years, breaking many winning records in the regular season. Although they are not as good now, that level of dominance from Golden State is very similar to what Man City are currently doing in the Premier League. I also like the parallels between their managers, Steve Kerr and Pep Guardiola. Both of them used to play former players and they were never really the best players in their team, but they have turned into incredible coaches and managers and dominated their leagues. I think this is a fantastic comparison. If you're a Manchester United fan, support the LA Lakers. Two of the biggest clubs in sports, Manchester United and the Los Angeles Lakers, are two of the most successful clubs in their respective leagues, so this was an easy one. Both teams have had some of the most popular players in their leagues, in Wayne Rooney, Ronaldo, Beckham for United, and Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, Shaquille O'Neal for the Lakers. They are two highly successful but iconic clubs and have huge global reach. If someone is becoming a basketball fan for the first time, they're probably going to root for the Lakers. United is also the popular team that tends to have most of the fans who have no real connection to the city or club go to them. No team has won more NBA championships than the LA Lakers, and no team has won more Premier League titles than Man United. This was pretty simple. Let's move on to more interesting ones. If you're a Newcastle United fan, support the Utah Jazz. Newcastle haven't won a trophy for 50 plus years, but they were very, very close to winning the title. They were leading the Premier League title race in 1996-97 when Kevin Keegan went on the radio and had that iconic moment, and Newcastle spiraled out of control, and Man United won their games and overtook Newcastle to win the title. So they thought they were going to break their 40-year trophy drought, and it all fell apart at the last minute, and that was as close as they come. Utah was a team that in the 90s was the team. The only reason they didn't win titles is because Michael Jordan was there. A team that throughout the years has had pretty interesting teams and different variations. They've knocked on the door but never got through. They got to the doorstep, but aside from the 90s when Jordan was there, they never really got that close, but they've also never really been too bad. Both teams were realistically only denied a return to silverware by the greatest dynasty in Premier League history in Man United's Fergie team, and the greatest dynasty in NBA history with Jordan's Bulls, which makes this a perfect comparison. If you're a Nottingham Forest fan, support the Portland Trail Blazers. Portland won a title in 1977. That whole team was beloved. They then lost to the Bulls in 1992. The late 90s, early 2000 teams were pretty good, but also nicknamed the Jail Blazers. That's kind of the most infamous period in their team's history because a bunch of those players got in trouble with the law. And now more recently, they still have not really been able to get to a championship level team. They've been peaking as a second round type of team and had some great players like Damian Lillard. But they've had a tormented history because so many of their players have gone down with major injuries, and that has kind of ruined their potential, but they've had some winning. Now in terms of a history thing, this is kind of similar to Nottingham Forest, who were briefly the best team in England, in Europe actually, with a legendary coach in Brian Clough. He got them promoted and then won the league and the European Cup. So the thing about Forest is that Spurs have never really had, but this was really the only one I could compare. And I mean, you could kind of say during that period though, Forest were always pushing for promotion back to the Prem and came close but always fell short. And the Blazers were pushing for NBA titles, but again, never really managed it. If you're a Spurs fan, support the Brooklyn Nets. Tottenham haven't won much silverware recently, and it's a club that has lived in Arsenal and Chelsea's shadow in terms of success. It's not to say they haven't had good seasons, but their success came in the 60s and 70s, similar to Brooklyn, whose best run was in the early 2000s, when he had Julius Erving, who is an all-time great. In the 90s, Spurs were kind of a cup team or finished middle of the pack, and they weren't necessarily challenging for titles, not until very recently. Even then, they challenged for titles, but they haven't made that final push and won anything. So that also goes with the Nets and the reboot of the franchise. They used to be the New Jersey Nets, but no one really cared about them in New Jersey, so they moved to Brooklyn, but yet to bring tangible success as the Nets. That's similar to Spurs, who have a brand new stadium but are yet to have achieved anything of note in the stadium yet. Another thing is that they have also recently pushed very hard to win but failed. The Nets recruited James Harden, Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant but failed horribly, and Spurs to a lesser extent haven't signed big name players but got big name managers in Conte and Mourinho to try and win and didn't. Okay, if you're a Sheffield United fan, support the New Orleans Pelicans. The Pelicans are a fairly new franchise. The Charlotte Hornets moved to New Orleans, so the Charlotte Hornets became the New Orleans Pelicans, and then the Charlotte Bobcats got their own team. But since then they have had no silverware. They nearly made it to the Western Conference Finals once with Chris Paul, but have had no true success. They have this kind of overlapping history with the Hornets, and the Hornets took back their name, so they've actually got little identity, but they play in a great city despite being pretty bad as a team, although recently haven't been too bad with Zion Williamson in their team. So, for a team that has only enjoyed success in recent years or so, or certainly the most successful period in their history, and that could be Sheffield United. The thing about Sheffield is that they are currently enjoying a horrible season, but they did recently finish very high in the Prem, competing for European spot that year. Unlike the Pelicans though, Sheffield United are a very historic team. They are one of the two teams from Sheffield, which is a northern industrial city, and is a great city for football, with another team in their city as well. Despite being in a great city, they haven't had loads of success though, but have had some decent times in recent years, which is exactly what the Pelicans are. If you're a West Ham fan, support the New York Knicks. West Ham is in London, the Knicks are in New York, and so they are one of the most valuable franchises in the world based on their location. But both of them are not necessarily the most successful teams when you consider how big their city is. West Ham had a lot of success historically and cling on to that, but they are not that successful now, which is similar to the Knicks, who hang on to the glory days of the 70s and 90s, but have been pretty bad in the last 20 years, which West Ham have been very similar to. Both have had some great players over the years, but have never really been able to build a truly successful team, as most of those great players end up leaving the franchises. Okay, and finally, if you're a Wolves fan, support the Memphis Grizzlies. The Memphis Grizzlies started out as the Vancouver Grizzlies, but moved out to Canada about 10 years after their birth, moving to Memphis, and had a little bit of success getting a few rounds into the playoffs, but not very far. Their famous era was about 2012 to 2017, the grit and grind of the Grizzlies, just a really hard-working team that matched the ethos of the city. A beloved team in Memphis, and they got some real love around the NBA too. More recently, they've had some of the most exciting players in the NBA, with the likes of Ja Morant and Sharon Jackson, with some potential of going far, but they've not properly delivered. So really the last 10 years have been pretty fun for Grizzly fans, but everything before that is probably not worth remembering. This is similar to Wolves, who also in recent years have had some fun players such as Adama Traore, Pedro Neto, Raul Jimenez. They've had a few decent seasons in this period, but never anything for a sustained period. But they've always been a solid team capable of going on a good run, just like the Grizzlies.